A very good morning to you, Lagos, and welcome to Freshly Pressed 981. It's part of Smith Breakfast with Ayo.
And Valentine.
And this morning on Freshly Pressed 981, as always, we give a detailed analysis of the newspaper stories. If you look through the Twitter page, the hashtag is Freshly Pressed 981. Add that to your messages so we can read them out on the show. You can also watch us live using on YouTube. Use that handle Smooth91FM or just type youtube.com/Smooth91FM so you can join the conversation and leave a message using the live chat tag there. And not forgetting WhatsApp, which is very important for you to send me your messages through. That number is 0809 444 0981.
I'll go to our first story right now, or before then, I'd introduce our guest. I'm so eager to get into it.
Yes.
It's a good Friday here, but I have with us a voice that you're perhaps familiar with, but
Yes.
it's great to have him again in the studio. Usually I'll do ladies first, but I have to welcome him back especially. Oria Iyayi is here. Good morning, Oria.
Good morning.
Great to have you. He's at Mr. Bure on
Yes.
Twitter.
Yes.
Look how I'm saying you as if I've seen you.
Mr.
I've
Bure.
met you before. All right, and of course you heard her laughter. Miss Ireti Bakare-Yusuf is here as well. Good morning.
And her sneeze earlier.
And she's at Sisioge Lagos. And of course we have Tunde Okufi at Bicoops on Twitter.
Morning, Naya. Morning, Lagos.
Good morning.
Morning, Valentine.
All right, so of course, because we haven't seen you in a while, we're giving you the first stories. I'm coming
you
to
very
you
much.
for the analysis. Now, big story here. When it broke, I actually saw this first off in a WhatsApp group I belong to, and I thought it was a joke or just a meme. Federal government closes case against Onnoghen from the Punch newspaper. Where can you please take us through the story?
Yeah, basically, this is about the Code of Conduct Tribunal case against the Chief Justice of the Federation, Walter Onnoghen, who you might recall was suspended by the president, and Justice Tanko Mohammed was appointed as acting Chief Justice, based on allegations of failure to properly declare assets in line with the law. So this is a story about the prosecution has closed this case against him after presenting some witnesses. But the important takeaway from the trial so far is that I've mentioned this before, but media trials are very dangerous because according to the Code of Conduct and various other spokespeople, Walter Onnoghen had a billionaire in his bank accounts. He had 55 houses. He had millions of dollars. He had pounds. He had euros. And then they've come into court and they said he has 5 houses. He doesn't have billions of naira. He has less than a tenth of a billionaire. He doesn't have millions of dollars. He has about his current balance in his dollar account is about $30-something thousand and so on. But for me, you can leave all that aside. The most important revelation at the trial was that his asset declaration forms have not been verified by the Code of Conduct Bureau. So essentially, it's like saying someone committed murder and announcing to the world that he's a murderer, and you are charging him with murder, and you get to court and there's no victim, there's no dead body,
They've not
no other
investigated.
weapon. You basically come to court and you're in court now. Present your evidence and you say, well, actually, what did you investigate? No, we didn't investigate. We just arrested the man and brought him here.
All right, Oria, big questions. Next steps. Number one, would the CGN sue the federal government? Number two, would he be reinstated from his suspension?
Well, that's a bit down the road because the trial is not done.
Okay.
What has happened is the prosecution has rested, so that means the government's case is done, and the defense has entered a no case submission, meaning that the prosecution has basically failed to prove his case. So the panel has to rule on that submission by the defense. So it can go two ways.
Okay.
Either the panel agrees that there is no case for the CJ to answer and dismisses the charges, or it insists that the defense presents its own defense. So we're waiting for that ruling now. But essentially, if his asset declaration forms have not been verified, then there is literally no basis for a trial. because the entire trial is predicated on he failed to declare his assets properly. So if you did not verify the assets he declared before charging him, what are we doing in court?
The only question I would have to that is, so as of which point were these asset declaration forms submitted, right? Because how long has Onnoghen been the, what's it called?
Chief
The
Justice
Chief
of
Justice, CJ?
I believe he was appointed by acting president Osinbajo.
Right, so that would have been last year,
But he
wasn't
still-
it? It was,
2017.
yeah, it
but
would
he
have been,
still
was
the
it 2017 when
during,
Buhari was
Jonathan's
away?
time at the time.
Pardon?
No, he was.
Oh,
his
sorry, yes,
first-
20,
his
we
first
just
asset
started
declaration
2019,
form was
2017.
Yes, the declaration.
Yes, and he
Right.
had one in 2014 and then one in 2016.
Right, so
Both those forms were not verified by CCB.
therein lies the issue. Now, who is responsible? Because we have to break things down, all right? The government have done their media trial, and we know that the chances are they're going to be getting eggs on their face. But also, we have to look at our legal structure in itself and those
Absolutely.
who own each part of the process.
Yeah.
Who is supposed to ensure those forms are verified, those assets are verified,
The
sorry.
Code of Conduct Bureau,
Right, and who's in charge of the Code of Conduct Bureau?
the executive,
Being
the
Oga
presidency.
Patapa.
Yes.
So it's the presidency that's supposed to actually verify that.
Yes.
And they're the ones that haven't. So the same people who haven't done their job are the
Exactly.
same people who are actually making the accusation.
Yes.
Right. That
And
makes it
the
even
same
more
people
interesting.
who
Drama
sent in
continues.
a court order saying that the man must be suspended in order
Yes.
for him to be tried.
Well, we all know that that was political. And, you know, I think the political aspect of it is yet to be discussed because we must look at the legal aspect of it first
Yes.
because it's a case of what does Onnoghen know? What is it that he was planning to do?
Why
That they
did
didn't want him-
Why is he viewed
that-
as a
that-
threat?
Yes, that they didn't want him to be able to do another, so they decapacitated him, if you like.
All right.
You know,
This is
that's-
a big story, and I know we
yes.
could dwell on this as well as read comments from this particular story, but we have to move on because we have other stories here.
You're right,
But-
also from 2017.
But
Yeah.
so that's when he was confirmed. It's interesting to see how the drama would unveil as the trial continues. But Lagos federal government closes case against Onnoghen. Now, AMCON seeks reintroduction of failed bank act. Tunde, I'm coming to you for this story. This is in the Guardian newspaper. Now, the act in summary was to provide for the recovery of debts owed to failed banks and for the trial of offences relating to financial malpractices in banks and other financial institutions.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, primarily to hold officers of financial institutions responsible for malpractices, financial malpractices, and financial malpractices are pretty blatant and have can come in many shapes and forms, but primarily, which is one of the ways that impacts the health of a bank the longest, and as a fallout of that, the economy as a whole, in the issuance of credit,
Yes.
not following the right practices and measures in the issuance of credit. And this, it's easy to think about this only as the large commercial deposit money banks, but also we have a plethora of microfinance banks as well, and a lot of things happen there because they're very weak governance structures, should I say, in certain regards. It still is possible for institutions and certain officers, depending, senior officers in banks, to issue credit to organizations and individuals without going through all the full and proper checks. And when you start to analyze why this credit was issued, bottom line, why a loan was given to a certain individual for a certain venture, and you look at all the you look at the underlying business, the reason why they took the money, all the typical risk management parameters that should be conducted, you begin to wonder why credit was issued, which is where you hear allegations of people giving credit to their friends or institutions
Their
that they
brothers
have,
and sisters.
exactly, that they have personal interests in. So what you have, or what you see really is a case where deposit money banks, the banks that have done well and banks that do well, are the ones that have, in a sense, yes, there's regulation, but we all know that enforcement is the problem here. So those who have self-regulated, in a sense, have survived, but instances and places where people have chosen or wanted to take advantage of the lapses, they have been able to, right? So, one interesting thing is, at one point in time, one question is, at one point in time, what did they replace the Failed Banks Act,
Yeah.
with
Absolutely.
why is it difficult to go after individuals, principal officers of failed financial institutions? What was this act replaced with? Such that, I mean, we now say we have to reintroduce this. It would be a huge gap if it was replaced with nothing,
Yes.
or perhaps what is replaced with is not as effective.
Yeah.
But this is it's very important. I mean, the banks, all of them have their laid down provisions for how they issue credit, but once in a while you find that they go outside of that to issue credit, and those kind of things, and especially when those loans go bad, invariably they always do. People need to be held accountable.
Thank you very much. Now, this statement was made by the managing director of AMCON, Mr. Ahmed Lawan, who himself has once been a banker and now an enforcer.
And very rightly, just one last thing. Look, banks are integral to economic development, right? One key thing that he noticed that they noted here is that a lot of the loans, a lot of credit that goes bad, the banks have a habit to give large credit to large sums to large individuals, so to say, and those loans simply go bad. Meanwhile, there is the SME sector that would drive the engine of the economy, lack the ability to get credit until government intervenes. So it's very important that you do things properly.
All right, thank you very much, Tunde. Now, the next set of stories are from River State, Port Harcourt and River State, but would take the INEC one first, which is still on election matters. Before we go to Port Harcourt, we will
quick
first
message
take
here
our messages.
on WhatsApp from Ben. Ben says, in the case of the federal government versus Onnoghen, I hope we can now see how the president ridiculed his person and the nation by his premeditated conviction of Onnoghen through the mass media. We can also see why we should always be circumspect in passing judgment against people in the absence of fact or without due process. Now we know that all three witnesses of the government have passed waste on the government's case. At the time the man is discharged, will the president, Mr. President, be man enough to publicly apologize to Onnoghen and Nigerians and the international community for his indiscretion?
I doubt if Onnoghen will just want an apology.
Election is over, so they can let him go.
Exactly.
Okay, I'll go on to this next story, Tunde. INEC, resumption of collation announcement of Rivers election results to hold between April 2 and 5. This is the Thisday newspaper reporting this very quickly. Could you take us through the story?
Okay, so we all know that elections in Rivers were postponed because of huge problems, not so much with the conduct of elections, so to say, on polling units. Yes, there were issues, there were disruption, there was disruption, there was ballot boxings. Now we also those videos of polling units being disrupted, but on a whole, by and large, according to INEC anyway, elections did occur in most of those places. Now the problem and the issue happened with collation of the results, and we also saw those videos where and they mention it, where they talk about the unsavory intervention of soldiers, interrupting and disrupting. This is soldiers and thugs, political thugs, interrupting the process. But it's very disturbing that even INEC would pronounce and say that soldiers were involved. We saw videos anyway. So for me, if elections held, but then there's a large problem with collation, does that make a case for electronic voting or other ways to automate the process? So it just removes one point at which things are being disturbed. The other thing that I'd like to note here that I find very important is they also speak on the Imo elections, and they speak on Roches's election to the Senate, and they say that they withhold they're standing by their position, which is that he will not be issued a certificate of return, and it can only be that decision can only be overturned in a court.
All right, thank you very much, Tunde. Now, Oria, I'll come back to you for this one. NNPC begins rehabilitation of 210,000 barrels per day Port Harcourt refinery. This is from the New Telegraph.
Yeah.
Can you take us through the story, please?
Yeah, this is basically the GMD of NNPC announcing with great fanfare.
Excited.
Yes, excitedly.
That's the word that was used there.
Excitedly announcing that we are rehabilitating Port Harcourt refinery, which has a capacity of 210,000 barrels per day.
Yes.
And this is 19 years after the last turnaround maintenance was carried out on that particular facility. And now, essentially, though, this is the first, they are flagging off the first 6 months, which is an integrity check and equipment inspection, following which the actual rehabilitation work will begin.
What I find curious is in this country, we reportedly consume around 53 million liters of petrol a day,
According to
according to
the
the NNPC. And this facility would have the capacity of refining 15 million barrels or 15 million liters of petrol per day. So it's
So we're
not
still
even
not
it's not even a
meeting up.
drop. It's like it's just
But remember the
It's a
reaction of
drop
the
in the
Senate
ocean.
president when that figure was, put forward, and when NNPC released that figure saying that 53 million liters are consumed, and he said it was so much, it was larger than what's reality.
well. That's the funny thing is we've had these issues with local refining of crude oil for basically decades. Ever since then head of state General Abacha cancelled the turnaround maintenance of Kaduna refinery, and essentially we discovered it was more lucrative to import petrol than to refine it locally. We all remember the subsidy scam and scandal under President Jonathan's administration, where it turned out people were being paid subsidy for bringing in empty ships or just simply presenting pieces of paper. So I would like to say this is actually a step in the right direction,
Okay.
but a country like Nigeria should have modern refineries with higher capacities than this, and any serious administration would have or should be tackling that particular issue, because the issue of subsidy, a lot of that money goes out, it doesn't come back in. So, well, it's good that the GMD is jubilant over beginning the inspection of the refinery before the actual work begins.
I like the optics that you bring forward with this, Oria, because one of the questions in my mind was just speaking about this, because we mentioned something similar to this yesterday.
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of money paying foreign companies as per se, to bring in these products, refined products after exporting the crude for them to process. But the process, and we know that if you process crude, you get so many more byproducts, from that, just more than just diesel or petrol. So would it cost us more or less if we have the capacity, if we actually set up a capacity to process it ourselves and have all these byproducts to market?
Ultimately, it's cheaper, because from a barrel of crude oil, you get petrol, you get diesel, you get kerosene, you get bitumen, you get tar, even plastic byproducts come from a single barrel of crude oil. So just selling crude oil and importing petrol is it's a short-sighted strategy. I believe South Korea has one of the biggest, if not the biggest, refinery in the world, and they don't have a single drop of crude oil in their country, but they buy, refine, and sell it.
Fine. Thank you, Oria.
Profits. Anyway, let's move to the next story. Mr. Ireti, I'll come to you for this one. From the Guardian newspaper, over 3.6 million Nigerians lack water, sanitation, hygiene, says UNICEF. Today is World Water Day, and the Nigerian representative of UNICEF, Mohammed Fall, made this known in a report titled Water Under Fire. He said out of this number, 3.6 million Nigerians in need of potable water, 1.1 million are internally displaced persons.
That's obviously not surprising given the situation and the condition that they live in. But what I would like to bring out of this is how, when we talk about gender issues, we talk about it as if women are just making noise. And I'm fed up with people constantly saying, feminists don't know what they want. They don't know this, they don't know that. Oh, you're just bashing men. Now, talk about water. Who do you think it affects the most? Girls. There's a quote here. Girls are particularly affected. They are vulnerable to sexual violence as they collect water or venture to use latrines. They deal with affronts to their dignity as they bathe and manage menstrual hygiene. And they miss classes during menstruation if their schools have no suitable water and sanitation facility. We take that for granted, and it's very true. Often when you're driving along, whether there's water or not, a man would just drop out of the car and go and do his thing. A female can't, and especially when you're on your menstrual cycle, it's certainly not even, you can't even consider it. And this is part of why, if we truly care about our girls, if we're truly focused on creating a world with balance, and I'm talking about a Nigeria with balance and the same opportunities and health, quality health for all, then we really have to look at everything from the most minutiae upwards. This is bad overall, the fact that, we have 79% of those affected because of this water shortage are women and children. Of course, all the time it's always women and children. And then when you compound it with the effects of war, who are often the collateral damage? Women and children, because they take advantage and all of these things. So yes, it's yet another sad and depressing story. Not that I'm trying to depress you on a Friday, Lagos, but it is what it is. I am a realist
I
after
think the
all.
number is understated. I said I think the number is understated.
The number, the 79%.
3.6
Largely
million. No,
understated.
3.6 million.
Yes, of course, it certainly is, because even if we bring it into our city, bring it into Lagos itself, there's a well. Have you seen that well? There's a well right opposite, am I allowed to say it? I don't know, Eco Hotel. There's a well right opposite on that road that people were, and that's in our big metropolis. You can imagine that they have to come there and fetch water in a well. And the primary schools. So yes, it's a lot more, like you said, a lot more.
Yes, but it's a very important conversation for us to have, especially today.
Well, we keep having this conversation. Sorry to interrupt you, Valentine. We keep having these conversations. I'm sick and tired of having conversations. I would actually like some action. I would like, by next year, for us to be able to say the number has reduced of those affected by lack of water has reduced to this, because the government have actually done this.
And that. Yes. Right. Thank you very much, Ms. Ireti. Now, let's move on to you, Tunde, for the analysis of this story from Thisday newspaper. Clearing agents accuse customs of sabotaging trade facilitation. Essentially, they are complaining that, their duplication of functions, which causes delay at the ports. And they said, first, they give instances where last week they actually also accused the customs of the abuse of end user certificate. They said this and that action really is inimical to ease of doing business. But your thoughts, because we see that they're complaining. There's a reaction from the customs officers saying that these systems are put in place just to check all the excesses and the malpractices that exist there.
Yeah, so an unideal solution for an unideal situation, or an inefficient solution for an unideal situation, and it affects, like the story rightly says, ease of doing business. I thought a couple of months ago, prior to the elections, were celebrating how we moved up on the ease of doing business index. I wonder really in reality where we are, or whether we've moved back. See, where an economy and a country is so reliant on our ports. We trade, outside of government earning an income, a lot of trade goes through our ports, and when it's difficult to get items through and in, it has a knock-on effect. When the cost of bringing things at the ports go up, it has obviously a knock-on effect on the end user.
Yes.
And look, this is one of those cases. Quite simply, the complaint here by clearing agents is that, look, they're customs officers who are designated, to carry out these functions of examination, checking, clearing, doing all the things that they're meant to do. They do that. Then in addition, there are other task forces that are asked to do exactly the same thing. One of these relatively new task forces is the CG task force. So after the regular custom officers have done their work, these guys then stop you and say they have to do it again. Right, and the reason for this is, according to clear officers, it's a worrying situation where the customs management cannot trust their own officers, which is what I mean by an inefficient solution.
Because they've been found to collude with some of the agents.
Yes, they've been found to collude, but if you can't trust the guy, why are you keeping him in a job? Why are there no sanctions for misbehavior? You burden us, burden the nation, burden the entire process. Your ease of doing business, you burden it with more bureaucracy and inefficiency by putting another layer. Why not fix the underlying issues? Who's to say this task force too doesn't have a problem? And it adds additional costs. It adds an additional, so you pay for the inefficiency. For these guys to check that you didn't ask for the additional check, you pay an additional 60,000 because those items need to be moved around.
Plus the demurrage.
Plus the demurrage
for what the extension of time causes.
For the extension of time. And then when you come out of that process, you think that is you're over and done with. Alas, you're not. There is another task force called the Abuja Task Force who would do the same thing. right? To me, we're not daft in this country. We're actually very intelligent people.
Yes,
when
yeah.
systems like are set up in this manner, it's for one purpose and one purpose alone, to set up a tool, right?
Exactly.
Because something will drop at
Exactly.
every
So like a
stage.
revenue possibly.
It's
Yeah,
possibly.
but that you also have to question: is that revenue going to the federal
It's
government?
of very good point. Yeah, usually when people set up these tools, you set them up for their own.
Wow.
Exactly.
Well, thank
For
you,
their own purpose.
thank you, gentlemen. Let's move to this next story now from the Guardian. Guardian newspaper. Nigeria's Employers Union warns the federal government on the VAT hike, VAT. Recall that 2 days ago we talked about the minimum wage, national minimum wage, finally passing second reading on the floor of the House. But there were indications at that time that the tax might increase. But then the people are crying out. So now the recent reaction coming from the Nigeria's influential, or rather employers union, warning the federal government not to go ahead, that it's going to impact negatively on the workers' minimum wage.
I don't know which part of them is influential, but anyway, let's leave that aside. Yes, look, you guys just discussed the whole clearing of customs, etc., extra toll, yada yada yada, and then now they're talking about VAT, raising VAT, 5%. However, apparently it was just a suggestion. It would appear that it's not going to be going ahead. I think they basically just tried to, poke at us and see how we would respond. So maybe that's where this influential title for the union came in, and because they screamed out loud. Look, if there's one thing we do know in Nigeria is that we do need to raise revenue without a doubt, and we we have a huge revenue shortage. And other clients, and one of the things, the powers that's open to government, actually, which can't be questioned, is using taxes to raise revenue, and in particular using VAT. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. You've talked about on Freshly Pressed, not Freshly Pressed, Rotus's show, Business Express. The other day you were talking about getting taxes from the informal sector, etc. But I'm saying to you, go to the informal sector and tell them you want to raise their taxes, and they're putting in all these measures to be able to collect money from the market women. What exactly are you giving them in return for those taxes? VAT, yes, I think go for luxury goods. Don't put carte blanche, how do you say, just across the board and paint everything with a higher VAT. You've increased minimum wage to 30,000. It's good. It's about time. But you give me 30,000 and then you want to take what, half of it back, because that 30,000 might have made a slight difference to the way to what I'm going to buy or the cost of food. But then you raise it up and then it's gonna just basically.
It's going to affect the
thank
price
you,
of goods
thank
and
you.
services.
You've cannibalized it basically. So yes.
So you actually, in the end, reduce purchasing power, because like someone mentioned yesterday, that perhaps we should be looking at purchasing power rather than increase in minimum wage.
Well, yes. I mean, Tunde wants to say something
Increasing
before.
purchasing power parity of your currency is a lot more than just. It's a reflection of the wider economy. But for me, I don't agree with increasing VAT. I don't agree with increasing VAT. I don't agree with introducing new taxes. We have taxes. What about widening the tax bracket?
Well, that was part of the thing. That was part of the. Well, that was part of.
To increase it.
That's what
That's part of what he's saying. And like I said, you guys talked about, Reuters talked about the informal market, which is part of widening the taxes to generate more revenue. Yes, let's widen the taxes, but we actually need to tidy up the process by which we collect those taxes. Because if we can't identify everybody in the country, how are we going to get taxes from them?
They're making us pay more.
I like that you mentioned that. I mean, touching on the story of the census, it's a no-brainer. I'm saying, I mean, the budget that they put forward in 2015 would not apply even this year because inflation, because Naira devaluation. But very quickly, let's touch on this next story. Just in 30 seconds, please, for mention. Acting CJN swears in more tribunal members from the Thisday newspaper. Oria.
Yeah, the elections have come and gone, and every lawyer worth his salt is gearing up for tribunal season. So the acting CJ has sworn in the final batch of justices that would adjudicate over election issues emanating from this past elections just conducted. So now this it ties back into the treatment of Justice Onnoghen, because Justice Tanko Mohammed wouldn't be acting CJ if the machinations to take out
Onnoghen hadn't been done. So
Yes.
again, like you look at stuff like this and you can't help but feel like the legitimacy
Mm.
of even these acts would have to be called into question.
Mm.
And ultimately, you're going to have to ask the law to do a kind of contortion to accommodate, because for instance, it's been argued that if you're sworn in as a governor for an election you didn't win, every act you've taken while you're a governor should be thrown out, but that doesn't happen. So essentially the law would then have to somersault and contort itself to accept that, okay, an act was done by an illegal person, but it's a legal act. So I don't believe that the legitimacy of these tribunals will be called into question, but the person carrying out the inaugurations of these tribunals, I believe personally, shouldn't be there.
It should be examined closely.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much,
Thank
Obi.
you,
I'll
Oria.
take some comments on WhatsApp before we go. Rotimi Shomi from Amwodofin says, it's now obvious that the case against Onnoghen was politically motivated. It's unfortunate to operate a system riddled with insincerity, deceit, and subversion of good judgment.
And finally, from Big T, feminism is a simple equality. We need to value our women. Government needs to kindly provide water to the people. Boreholes everywhere is dangerous, really. And Waji will talk about we'll talk about tectonic plates being shaken. Well, special thanks to everyone who stepped in this Friday for the analysis of the stories. Ms. Ireti Bakare-Yusuf is at CTOG Lagos,
Thank you.
and Tunde Okufi is at Big Coves, and Oria.
Oria is at Mr. Bure on Twitter. Thank you, Lagos, for being. I was going to give you another name, another moniker. Mr. Bure on Twitter, and we're at Smooth 91 FM on Twitter. So please follow us collectively. At 8:15, Tega will be in the studio for Locker Room. So all the news and gist from the sporting world in a few minutes.